The Baggies Podcast, giving you the latest news, views and opinions on all things Albion. Now available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Hello and welcome to the Baggies Podcast. It's episode 19 here and we've got plenty to cover in this week's episode. We're going to be talking about the game against Manchester United, which happened last night. We're going to be talking about the different changes that Slaven Bilic implemented to the lineup last night. We're going to be talking about the different VAR decisions, the different refereeing decisions, which caused plenty of controversy in both sets of fan bases. And we're also going to look ahead to the Sheffield United game next week, which can only be described as a must-win game. We're also going to be reading out your thoughts. We're going to be giving you the Baggies Podcast Man of the Match again, and we're going to be giving you some Twitter questions to be answering. So without further ado, let's get straight into this week's episode of the Baggies Podcast. The Baggies Podcast, giving you the latest news, views and opinions on all things Albion. Now available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So, I'm sure as you'll have all watched and realised, West Brom lost 1-0 to Manchester United at Old Trafford last night. It was a game in which Bruno Fernandes scored the only goal of the game from a penalty spot, and a game that was marred with VAR controversy and refereeing controversy as well. So there's plenty of things to be discussing in this week's podcast. We're going to be discussing referees and VAR towards the end of the episode, so just stick around if you want to hear my thoughts and obviously everybody else's thoughts on the decisions last night. But firstly, let's start with the lineup. So as we found out before the game, Slaven Bilic confirmed there are a couple of COVID cases amongst the squad, and that is with Gibbs and Jake Livermore. So two players out there with COVID-19. Not sure how long they'll have to isolate for, but the confirmed case, there are two of them there. Apparently a couple of people collected COVID-19 throughout the past week, but due to the fact that they'd been on international duty for 10 days, they were able to isolate and be ready for today's game. But having not trained in that time, they would have been on the bench. So yeah, it's wrong to speculate about who that is, but there were a couple on the bench apparently that had been tested positive for COVID-19 and have actually come out of that isolation period before the game. So it was a 3-4-3 implemented, or a 5-4-1 if you like, something along those lines, with Johnston in goal, Connor Townsend left back, Carl Bartley, Branislav Ivanovic, Semi Ajayi as centre-backs, with Darnell Furlong at right-back, Grady Diangana on left wing, Conor Gallagher and Romain Sawyers in the middle, Mateus Pereira on the right, and Karlan Grant as the lone striker. The most notable change there really being Romain Sawyers coming in for Livermore in the midfield. Man United played a 4-2-3-1 with De Gea, Wan-Bissaka, Lindelof, Maguire, Telles, Fred, Matic, Mata, Fernandes, Rashford, and finally Martial up front. A fairly standard bench as well, with on the bench being David Button, Dara O'Shea, Harper, Robinson, Kanu, Karinovic, Phillips. A fairly standard bench for us. Unfortunately, Jake Livermore and Kieran Gibbs had both tested positive for coronavirus, so unfortunately they weren't with us in the squad. There were rumours that it would have been some of the players away on international duty that contracted it, but no, just them two, and obviously wish them all the best and hope that they get better soon and a swift recovery. But that was the line that we went out with. It seemed like throughout the game that Diangana and Pereira would sort of like drift infield and become attacking midfield and implement that sort of narrow midfield, where they sort of sit behind Grant, and Furlong and Townsend would sit and sort of mill up and down the line and create that width for West Brom, sort of, with Diangana perhaps pushing more wide than Pereira, because Pereira, we know, is more influential in that number 10 position. It was just the fact that he wouldn't exactly be named as that number 10 in the lineup, but in fact would be moving into that number 10, sort of when we were in possession, but obviously covering those wide areas to help out Furlong throughout the game. So all in all, minus potentially the absence of Livermore, Gibbs would have got into the side had he been available, because of Connor Townsend being pretty decent for me over the past few games, especially that game against Tottenham. I thought he was had a really good game, a real standout. Same in the Brighton and the Burnley game. I think he was fairly solid. So all in all, I think he fully deserves to be in the lineup. Same with Furlong. His stats are fantastic this season. I wouldn't look at him this season and go, you've been a standout performer. I'd say he's played all right, but the stats prove that he's actually been one of the better fullbacks outside of the top six. So you have to say that Furlong certainly deserves his place in the lineup. So does Connor Townsend. I was surprised to see a few of the players coming back in. I was surprised to see Pereira coming straight back in. I mean, he wasn't very good in that Fulham game, which was in fact the last game he played for us. But we didn't have him for the Tottenham game, and we're still pretty adequate if I'm being honest. Especially, I don't think Diangana played a full match. Another one to mention was Diangana. He hasn't been the player we saw last season. I say he played really, really well against Everton, but apart from that, he does worry me a bit that he's not perhaps getting to the heights that he did in the Championship. Yes, it's a step up, and yes, he'll probably get better. But yeah, you do have to say that Diangana has been in below par form. However, Pereira's starting to get into it a bit. Yeah, we'll talk more about him later on, but yeah, it's a bit worrying about Diangana. But overall, a decent lineup and a strong one that we took into the game. But let's move on into the game. So the first thing I'm going to start with talking about the game is actually the bright performance from the Albion. So we'll start with the positives, if you like, which was a very bright performance from the Albion. A game in which we looked the more positive side, I'd say, for large parts of the game. I mean, I don't mean positive as in more attacking, if you like, but I mean, more organised at the back, I'd say. Definitely giving 100% and an off sorts Man United side, if you like, because they just they created a few opportunities, give that, and the first person I'm going to start with complimenting is Sam Johnston. Really, really stepped up yesterday. Really bounced back, if you as well from that Tottenham game. Looked the part, looked fantastically. Adapted to Premier League life. It was so far. I feel like he's a contender for Player of the Season. And I tell no lie, I know I criticise him sometimes on the podcast for his poor handling, perhaps, and his lack of communication and commanding of his area. But surely his shot stopping is one of the best in the league. If I was Southgate, I might even look at that and think, is there something I can work on with him, with these distribution and his commanding of his area? Is that something I can work on with him and make him into a really good goalkeeper for England, perhaps? Because Dean Henderson's not getting the game time at Man United. And where are the other English keepers in the league? The Pickford's probably going to keep his number one spot for now, despite the fact he keeps making grave errors. Nick Pope looks to be, flooding in at number 2. Maybe there's room for Sam Johnson in that England squad. But yeah, really, really stepped up yesterday for me. I thought he looked fantastic. There were numerous saves. One of them quite early on from Martial, which was stunning. Another save from Rashford, which was a really close in save. He looked the part yesterday, Sam Johnson. It looked like he took a lot of stick after that game against Tottenham, but he's come back and he's shown exactly what he's made of, and that for me shows real character, shows real personality from Sam Johnston to come back and show exactly what you're made of, especially after, if essentially throwing the game away against Spurs, if you like, despite making good saves in that game. But he did essentially make the mistake which caused the game to be lost. But he's come back and he's actually kept us in that game, and probably you would have said, had decisions we were going to be talking about later in the podcast gone our way, he would have won us that game virtually. But yeah, that's Sam Johnston for you, who is my personal man of the match. We'll see who you guys have voted later on in the podcast, so stick around for that. Another positive is we had some chances in that game. Pereira and Grant had some nice link up in that first half. Pereira nutmegged Nemanja Matic. He was doing it for fun. Pereira. It was actually fantastic to see him show in full creative flow, if you like. He was nutmegging players, taking them on, making players look silly, making Manchester United players look silly at Old Trafford. Old Trafford is not the place it once was. We can all agree with that. It's one of those places where you can come and you can potentially get a result, but Pereira looked like he was having a whale of a time, nutmegging players, coming past them, causing them problems. It was fantastic. He played a lovely little ball through to Grant, which was just deflected wide, which was probably going in that bottom corner. I think he might have had De Gea just about beaten if it hadn't have been for that deflection, which took it wide. We had a header over from Bartley in the first half. We showed some really good organisation as well. I thought Man United, there were a couple of times, like I've mentioned, the Martial shot. Perhaps there was that one where Johnson had to come out and sort of parry the ball over somebody's head. That was probably another chance for Man United. But if you think about it not too many, defensive issues. In fact, no defensive issues. They were just really good work move from Man United, all being centred by Bruno Fernandes in those instances. Sawyers, I have to give compliments to him. He takes pelters on this podcast quite often. Takes podcast in the pelters in the Baggies community as well on Twitter. He does take his pelters, and he looked alright yesterday. Plenty of effort, I have to say, being put in from him. Some nice little tackles. Yes, he did give the ball away a bit cheaply at times, but still a decent performance from him for me. A shot from Robinson late on had De Gea beaten all ends up and hit the bar. We were really unlucky not to put the ball in the back of the net, and it was a really good performance against probably a very off the boil Manchester United side. We do have to talk about that. Manchester United, they just didn't look at it. The midfield looked a bit disconnected. I felt Matic and Fred was a bit of an odd midfield pairing. I wouldn't have put those two together. Matic was trying to get around the field, but ended up just sort of chasing people like Pereira and Diangana down the pitch. Fernandes looked really decent, on the ball, had a good game, scored the only goal of the game, obviously, after one attempt already. But yeah, he looked decent. I'd have to say Martial, I don't know what they're doing, persisting with him up front. I do have to say that Cavani looks the option for me that I'd play if I were Manchester United manager, because he just looks like he's got that sort of presence that they need up front. Rashford looked a bit off the boil as well. And as for the back four, disorganised at times. Some good tackles in there, some good organisation from Man United. But Maguire and Lindelof, they looked a bit disjointed at times, and I feel like that's something that Manchester United need to take a look at. But they were not feared. That's the only thing I can say that was a real positive, is that we went to Old Trafford and we didn't fear them. We looked the better side and probably should have won the game, but we're going to be discussing the VAR decisions and the referee in just a second. So there's clearly been an elephant in the room for the first 10 or 12 minutes of the podcast, and that is the VAR and refereeing shocker that happened at the Hawthorns. So we'll start with what the big refereeing decision in the game. The first came about, I'm going to just put an estimate on it being about 55 minutes into the game, if I can put it in any other way, if I can put it an estimate on it, really. About 50 minutes apparently. Townsend played the ball into Gallagher. Gallagher was chopped down by Bruno Fernandes in the penalty area. It was a foot to the shin. It probably wasn't enough for him to... I'd say it probably was enough for him to go down, but it is still a clatter to the shin. And it was given as a penalty. The referee, David Coote, gave it as a penalty, and it was given. And then VAR, obviously, as they do, they check it, they have a look, and they instructed David Coote to come over to the monitor and have a look for himself. The incident was that Bruno Fernandes had literally got his little toe on the ball and then clattered Gallagher's shin. So the penalty was then overturned by David Coote, and that was, it was absolutely ridiculous. And then Man United went down the other end. Fred fouled Conor Gallagher as he went towards his own goal. Then I think it was either Martial or Rashford played the ball in, and Furlong had his hand by the side of his face, like how like in a sort of sleeping position. If you were to put your hands by the side of your face, it was a bit like that, and gave a penalty to them. No check, no nothing, absolutely nothing checked. As far as I'm aware, they didn't even check the foul in the build-up. They just checked the handball. Fair enough. In the new law, that has got to be handball. It's just the way things are now. The game has literally gone in that aspect. You can't put your hands anywhere near the ball in the box. It's a foul. You have to sort of agree with that. Then Bruno Fernandes had his penalty saved by Sam Johnston. Sam Johnston was 2 metres off his line. It's fair, he was off his line. But surely, and then obviously he retook it. Johnson was again off his line, but he scored, so it doesn't matter. But surely, we'll start with the penalty. Actually. It was a penalty for West Brom. No two ways about it. Fernandes fouled Gallagher in the box. There's no two ways about it. It should be a penalty, and the fact that it was even sort of looked at on the monitor. You'd think about the things that they don't look at on the monitor, like things like silly handballs, silly little fouls across the pitch that lead to penalties and things. The things that they don't check compared to the thing that they did check there was absolutely ridiculous. It was a penalty for Gallagher. There's no two ways about it. It's like if you do a 2-foot tackle on someone, you're gonna get a touch on the ball, but you're also going to sweep a man out with you. So it's not like you can say if you get the ball, it's not foul. That's not how really things work. It was a bit really confusing. I myself was fuming. I can't believe that the decision was given in that way. I thought, when he gave the penalty, I thought, what a good decision. Well done for spotting that, because that is a really difficult foul to spot. Players like sort of covering the referee where he was, so you couldn't quite see if you were the referee where that's been. So that probably invited him to go and look at the monitor. You have to. Yeah, fair enough. You're going to go and look at the monitor if you're unsure about a decision. You go and look, and you go, fair enough. I've got that right. I've got that right, and I need to go. And let them take the penalty. Not, oh, whoa. I've clearly got. Is that a clear and obvious error? No, not really. Not in any way, shape, or form. Is that a clear or obvious error? It could, depending on how you perceive it, it could potentially not be a penalty, but it's not clear and obviously not a penalty. He has actually clattered his shin, whether you think he's got a little touch on the ball or not. He has actually clattered Gallagher's shin, and it's a penalty. You think if that was in the other box, it would be given, and I don't think he'd have gone over to the screen at all. Because full well, Gallagher, he went down perhaps a little softly, probably wasn't that much enough to make him fall to the floor like that. But if that was Bruno Fernandes, if you roll reverse and that was Gallagher tapping Bruno Fernandes' shin in the box, he'd be over and he wouldn't be up for 10 minutes. Until he was ready to take the penalty. But obviously, David Cooper's got that so horribly wrong, it's actually unreal, and that has actually gone out and cost us a point. But we'll move on to their penalty. So there was actually a foul in the build-up to the penalty. If you look, Fred trips Conor Gallagher. Gallagher's got his back to his own goal. He moves like the ball forward, and Fred gets his leg in front of his, and he trips him over. But obviously, he's just sort of let that go, and then the ball gets crossed in and it's handball. Fair enough, it's got to be a penalty. I'm afraid in this day and age, you've got to unfortunately give it as a penalty. As much as a West Brom fan, I absolutely resent to say that, because it's just not the way a handball works. Because full well, he's actually turning away to block it. It's not like he's looking face at it and he's, I'm going to try and get my hand in the way here. But the fact that he was the fact that he actually turned away from the ball tells you that he probably didn't have any intention to touch that ball with his hand whatsoever, and it was actually incredibly unlucky. I don't understand why he didn't just head it, in all fairness, but in this day and age it's got to be a penalty. We understand the handball rule now, we've done it so many times, it's just got to be the way things are, unfortunately, whether we like it or not. And then we've got it was given as a penalty, but there was a foul in the build-up. So why I don't understand why that wasn't checked by VAR. The only thing checked was the handball, and we know full well that if it's Man United, they're going to give it. You have to say if the shoe was on the other foot with these penalties, I don't think the Man United one would have been given, and it's just ridiculous. I can't believe how we've ended up not winning that game. But then the encroachment by Sam Johnstone was probably fair. It's the way things are. But surely if Bruno Fernandes is going to do a step over the ball and a little stutter before, it's going to invite a goalkeeper to dive and make his mind up. And then he sort of loses his bearings because of this step. Surely if the step doesn't happen, then perhaps Johnson wouldn't be making the save that early. Surely if it's just a straight run up and a kick, he dives on his line. It's not really. The step shouldn't really be happening, in my opinion. He has actually, fair enough, it is in one motion, but surely the step just invites a goalkeeper to come and dive early and commit him. If he's going to adapt the rules to his own benefit, Bruno Fernandes with the step, surely Johnston could come a couple of yards off his line. We've seen it in so many different instances of goalkeepers coming off the line, and there were plenty of players encroaching on the box actually for the scored penalty by Fernandes. If you look, there were plenty of players, Man United players and West Brom players, coming into the area, so surely that should be retaken again, because by the letter of the law, if there is an encroachment on the box, then surely the penalty would be retaken. Apparently, VAR is only allowed to check it if the ball, if one of the players who was encroaching actually had a direct effect on play. But thankfully, it was a ridiculous decision. Johnston, yes, he was off his line, but surely if you're allowed to do the stutter, you're allowed to come off your line. It's sort of like the you're adapting the decision, you're adapting the rules to suit them. So overall, the referee got plenty of things wrong in that game. There was a foul up in the build-up to Manchester United penalty, and there was a blatant foul in the penalty area, which resulted in an overturned penalty for West Brom. I'm not sure where there would be a clear and obvious error in that decision, but surely there's got to be there was no clear and obvious error apart from the foul in the build-up to the penalty. Surely VAR should have at least checked it. It was a foul, it would be a foul anywhere else on the pitch, and would have been a foul in the build-up to that goal as well. But it's now time to look ahead to the Sheffield United game next week. Now, they are currently playing against West Ham. They're 1-0 up as I'm recording this, so obviously you'll know how they got on by the end of the podcast. But as it stands, Sheffield haven't won this season. They're another team who are yet to do so, along with Burnley and us. It's a must-win, and we need to replicate the two performances that we just had against Man United and Spurs, really. If we come out and give the same passion, it's very clear that players are playing for Slaven. It's very clear that players are playing for the club and for the badge. It's very clear that the play style is right. We're doing everything right. Unfortunately, we just haven't managed to find the back of the net. However, we should have last night, and perhaps should have in the Spurs game. Everything's leading to positive signs. It's just every time we seem to lead to positive signs and we get to a must-win game, we seem to crumble. When we've got nothing to lose, we play really well. But hopefully this one goes our way and we're able to pick up our first win of the season. But it's now time to check out the Baggies Podcast Man of the Match. So let's go and see the results from that poll. I gave you a few options. I also gave you another option this week in case any of you fancied picking a different one or anything like that. So we've got Sam Johnston, Matthias Pereira, Conor Gallagher, and a vote for somebody else. So Sam Johnston received 91% of the vote, with Conor Gallagher picking up 9% of the vote and Pereira picking up none. So that was a big result to a big result for Sam Johnston to win the Baggies Podcast Man of the Match this week. Wonder who's going to get it against Sheffield, but it's certainly a fantastic performance from Sam Johnston last night against Manchester United. So that brings us to the end of this week's episode of the Baggies Podcast. If you've enjoyed it, make sure you're subscribing on YouTube, you're subscribing on Spotify, Apple Podcast, you're downloading the episode and keeping in touch with our Twitter page at the Baggies Pod. So, an unfortunate week for Baggies fans with another loss, but one which we can take positive signs from into the Sheffield United game. And hopefully, you all have a good week, and we'll see you next week on the next episode of the Baggies Podcast after the Sheffield United game. See you next time. Have a good week. Bye-bye. The Baggies Podcast, giving you the latest news, views and opinions on all things Albion. Now available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts and Spotify.